we need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.
Hello and welcome to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's DIF. The DIF is an online broadcasting event that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation runs, where we speak to the people who have the great ideas around the circular economy, and today is no different. I'm your host, Colin Webster, and I'm part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation team who runs the DIF. It's my job here today to ask the questions, but it's also your job if you're watching this on your screens. How you get involved in asking questions is by using the comments section on the web page you're watching this on, or by using the hashtag ThinkDiff on Twitter. So send in your thoughts and your questions as the show goes out, and we'll make sure we put our questions to today's guest. Now, on to today's guest. We have been promised for some time a future of distributed manufacturing around the world, in which goods will be produced on demand and locally. Now, that might sound like a return to the past for some of you, but this promise is delivered by new technologies, or technologies such as the internet, such as CNC machines and 3D printers, that make that promise of making goods local a real possibility. Now, if all that doesn't mean very much to you, don't worry, because we've got a guest in our studio today who can bring it all to life. And our guest is the founder of OpenDesk. It's Johnny Steiner. Hello, Johnny.
Hi Colin, thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for being here for us. Yeah, great. So tell us, are we going to face a future of goods that are locally produced?
I think we are already seeing that happening. I think it's for different reasons and in different scales. As you said, in some ways things were always made locally, and maybe it is a return to that, but we're really seeing technology powering not only the making through digital tools and processes, but also the reach. So we're seeing people being able to reach big audiences from very small scale kind of craft making workshops. And we're talking about fashion, we're talking about food, and in our case, we're talking about furniture.
And that's is purely down to the power of the internet that we're finding out more about people who can do the making for us?
I think it's a combination of the reach and the accessibility, but then also a shift in consumer kind of positioning. So I think a lot more people actually care about the things that they consume, that they use. They want to know, for example, the provenance of things, like where their food has been produced, what's gone into it. They want to know how it's packaged. They want to get rid of the packaging. When it comes to fashion, they want to make sure that no one was exploited in the making. And with furniture, it's a similar thing. Like people want to find sustainable materials, and they really connect with the narrative of the story that someone locally is making something. It benefits the local economy. So we're really seeing that shift. I think technology is just powering it. It's just a tool that kind of enables this to grow and to increasingly happen.
Great. I'd love to delve a little bit more into that sort of mindset of the end user. But let's stick with the technologies just now. What are the technologies that can make local making of goods really come to life?
Well, I think there's a whole host of digital tools that we're excited about, and we looked into digital fabrication. So, of course, people are familiar with 3D printing, and it was quite a hyped kind of idea. This idea that you could literally print something on your kitchen top. If you broke a mug, you just print another one. There are, I think, some inherent problems with that thinking. It's not necessarily the right way to use that sort of technology, but there are really interesting things now being done in that. For example, printing with biomaterials, recycled materials. In our case, we got really excited about CNC technology, which is the CNC stands for computer numerically controlled. So as you can see on the image there, it's basically like a cutting machine. So we think of it like a big printer. You're sending a drawing to a printer. Instead of drawing things out with a pen, you're actually cutting shapes like a jigsaw out of a sheet of material. In our case, it's wood that's grown in a sustainable way. In the future, it could be recycled plastics or other interesting things. So we really see that technology is developing. As it develops, the price kind of comes down, it becomes more accessible, more and more people get access to these tools, innovation can really happen. There are fab labs around the world, fabrication laboratories, which are kind of open access workshops that you can go, you can join like a gym membership, and then you get access to all these tools, including the training. So they have 3D printers, they have these CNC cutting machines, they have other things like laser cutters and things like robot arms that fold things. All these things are actually powering a whole load of innovation, and after that, small startups which are then making things locally. And so, yeah, we're seeing a whole range of things.
And one of the things you were telling me off camera earlier about the CNC machine is this is quite a simple technology. You can order the parts and set up something in your own house.
Yeah, I can just illustrate that. There's a thing called a Blackfoot machine, which is you can basically download the drawings, cut them out with a saw, like a hand saw, or a hand router, hook up your laptop or your PC, and you've basically got one of these machines, like a lo-fi version. You can then actually use that machine to cut parts for the machine to make the machine a higher resolution, so you can kind of improve itself. This is super low cost. You can basically download, I think some of the files are open source, as in free, some of them there's a small kind of design fee. But you know, for probably under £1,000, you could have a machine that would enable you to make a whole range of things, including open desk furniture, but many other things besides. And then it's just about sort of training and also, you know, the finishing. So you could actually produce a very highly finished, almost professional piece using a very lo-fi machine.
I mean, it's a really exciting idea that one can build this quite easily at home and then use the build to upgrade it. I suppose to me, someone who's not involved in that sort of world, it sounds a bit like the promise of the 3D printer, though, that we're all going to have one in our house, as you said, to fix the mug. It's not for everyone, I guess, but what you're saying is more accessible.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for everyone, but then it is for quite a lot of people still. I think what we found at Open Desk, we started not really knowing much about this whole landscape. We just got excited about local production through designing a desk. And then we found a whole host of people with workshops, from homemade machines up to quite industrial strength, if you like, machines. They all do kind of the same thing, just the industrial ones are a lot faster. They can do clever things like moving the materials around, so it's a lot more efficient. But these workshops and these machines have been around for a long time, so it's a really mature, well-adopted technology. And actually, we also found that there's interesting companies. There's a company in Devon, for example, which makes church organs. They use a CNC machine for a very small part of their production, part of the one step in the production. A lot of the time, that machine's actually idle. It's not being used. Now, as you imagine, church organs, it's not like someone's ordering church organ every day. So these guys were struggling a little bit as a business. But they had the skills, the capacity to actually make other things. They approached us and said, you know, could we potentially make furniture in the downtime on our machine? And we said, yeah, that's fantastic, as long as you can sort of make it to the specifications and standards that we're at. And you know, obviously with being a church organ maker, they're pretty high end in terms of quality. So, you know, it's stories like that we're excited about, the power of technology unlocking. All of a sudden, a church organ maker in Devon can start selling digitally made furniture all over the UK.
And that, I mean, that brings me on to the next point, which is about you don't, as Open Desk, you don't own a bunch of manufacturing facilities around the world. That's not the distributed model we're talking about. No. You tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so our whole idea in the beginning was to say, well, let's not ship the goods. So let's ship only the recipe, not the goods and cakes. That's a quote by John Maynard Keynes. And that really was something that kind of was underpinning the thinking. Like, you know, you can ship the recipe, which is a digital file, but you can ship that file anywhere. It doesn't cost you anything to ship it. And you're basically shipping some digital design data. All you need to do is find the workshops, and then you can grow as a network, as a platform, wherever and however you want. If there's jobs to be done, they can be distributed to existing workshops with great, amazing people in these workshops who are highly skilled. they can fit it into their existing workflow, a bit like the church organs. That's the ideal scenario. They're not subcontractors to us. They're just great workshops who are able to make furniture in between other things. And then if the demand drops in that area, they go, that's not a problem to them. They can keep working on what they were doing. And we can actually, as a network, grow globally without having to build a factory, without having to employ loads of people and kind of ship things around. We can actually just send the design data and make it locally.
So you're networking, you're a place for producers to go to, designers to go to, and people to find both of those groups as well.
Yeah.
How do you find those producers to say? I mean, you find the church organist. How difficult is that job finding?
Well, it's interesting. We started really small. We started with one manufacturer in London. There's a story behind that, the first open desk, and through that we actually got some nice sort of a bit of press, a bit of people started talking about this idea. They were interested in the furniture, but also the model of distribution, because they saw it like disrupting, if you like, the 20th century model, which is really a linear model, making things thousands of miles away and shipping everything, very wasteful, very slow. So people actually wanted to join up, and we found that a lot of workshops contacted us. There's been a few cases, for example, there might be somebody wanting a load of furniture in Stockholm, and we're not aware of a workshop there yet. We actually just run a search, and you can find people, and we contact them, and we sort of sign them up that way. In a lot of cases, most cases, it's the other way around, of people that sort of found out about us. So I think that's through, social media. It's through some nice sort of things. People wrote some nice articles, sort of saying, this is an exciting idea. So that's kind of how it happened. Yeah.
So you're kind of like, whilst it's a distributed network, it needs some sort of centralizing point where people can go to and find out about all the different nodes.
That's right. Yeah. So it's the Open Desk website is a collection of the designs, the digital designs for furniture, and then a network of workshops. So it's a kind of directory and a catalogue, if you like. Those designs, some of them were by us. Originally, we're architects by training. We're not really furniture designers. And so we had a load of designers then contact us after we'd launched, sending us designs, and some of them were fantastic, and you can find those online, and there's a whole backlog of designs that we're still working on because we're a small team, and it takes a while to get things, sort of prototype them and make sure that they're engineered to the right sort of level. But we're sort of existing as a platform for emerging designers, and then the idea is that they get a route to market through many small workshops around the world.
I want to come to your backstory in just a minute, but first to this idea of how the modern world, I guess, was built. It was built in a multinational or a globalized way, I guess, a better way of putting it, where we perhaps in the global north produce the designs, and then the goods themselves get produced elsewhere.
That's right.
It's a very modern way, I guess, we tend to think of it. That's the way stuff gets made. That's the right way to do things, but you're seeing a chance to turn this on its head now with Open Desk.
I think that model has been critiqued heavily. There were reasons behind it, and we're not against globalization per se. I think it's great that things are global, but at the same time, some of these things don't necessarily make sense. So if you can have a machine or a person, well, it's always a person, but a person with a machine making something, why not have them as local as possible? Of course, there's cost implications. The old model, I think, relies on making things many, many thousands of miles away, which is kind of out of sight, conveniently, I would say, because that's where the land and the labor is cheapest. And then it relies on mass logistics, transportation, shipping, warehousing, retail markups come into play. It's often that there's a minimum order size, so you get huge stocks. Then you have discounting because you have things that you don't need. There's a whole load of things that model are associated with that model, which I think are wasteful and could be better. And we still think there are some fantastic companies out there that use a model that's very different to ours. But there are, I think, some problems with that model. of course, what we're talking about is something where, as a designer and a maker, and the maker can be one person in a garage, or it can be 20 people in a small factory-scaled workshop. But they're local to the city, ideally as local as possible. So for London, there are about 8 different manufacturers, and they have a kind of radius that they will serve. Some people might want to serve the whole of the UK, and we could take a view on that because we don't want to be too prescriptive. But really the idea is that it's as local as possible. So, you know, if you needed some furniture for your office, it's coming from maybe 10 to 20 minutes, maybe half an hour's drive away, rather than sort of many hours across the other side of the country or the other side of the planet.
And I guess that's what you're showing us in this image here. The previous one was showing us the sort of status quo.
Yeah.
Still globalized, as you were saying, because
Yeah.
there's facilities all around the world, but it's being produced locally. Tell us a bit about the Creative Commons in the middle there. It might be a term that's not familiar to everyone.
Right. Well, I guess the old model relies on people designing things under, you know, closely guarded sort of R&D centres, often in the, you know, West, if you want to call it that. Then things are made far away, then they're brought back, often to the same markets where they were designed. So that relies on copyrights and control of designs. And actually, the model we're talking about is one where the designer can be anywhere, the maker can be anywhere, and the customer is ideally as close to the maker as possible. They might be quite far from the designer. So we need to think about, okay, this is a human-scaled, local, kind of social way of producing things, but we also need to share data like design files. We need to get the right design data to the right manufacturer in the right location on time. The customer might actually be changing that design. They might be saying, I want this table to be a bit bigger or a bit higher or a bit wider. The designer might be saying, actually, I want to collaborate with someone else. I'm in London and this other designer's in Paris. So all these things are possible because we're actually sharing design files and we're doing versions of, there's an original design and then we're building on top of that. And so we then need a framework. We can obviously share things digitally, but the way we've approached this is to say Creative Commons is a kind of copyleft. It's like a permissive way of sharing things, which is saying, okay, I'm the author or you're the author, and no one's disputing that. But as the author, I actually see that there could be a net benefit in opening this up and letting other people use my design. And as the author or designer, I can choose how open I want it to be. It doesn't have to be completely open where, you know, someone can sort of make it pink and sort of fluffy and just do crazy stuff with it. Actually, you can say, well, actually, I'd like this to stay quite similar to my initial design intent, but I'm okay with you, you know, doing slight tweaks to it. Other people are much more open. It also allows designers to ask for a royalty so that when a design is made commercially, which is the way our model works, the designer would actually get some small compensation for that. So that's factored into the price that the end consumer gets presented with. But if the crucial thing about this is the designers are also saying that they're happy for their designs to be taken and used without a royalty if it's a kind of non-commercial use. So in a lot of cases that means in a fab lab, in a school, for a charity. So you've got people learning about digital fabrication, making things in workshops, using designs that are being shared because the designer's kind of okay about that. They're, in many cases, they're actually really happy about that. They're quite excited that people are taking their design and just doing crazy stuff with it.
And I guess people at home will be wondering about the economies of scale question. You get a major manufacturer to pump out 1,000 units of something at once in a far-off place where wages are probably low and the true cost of energy not built in and all that type of thing. The goods tend to be a lot cheaper than if they were made locally. So what's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously, it's important to get, I think, the right fit. And one of the ideas with the open desk model is things are local, so they're made to fit the local market. So it's something that's, you know, the cost of material, the cost of labor, and those things are relative to the local market within reason. So we're talking about a table that's made in Sao Paulo in Brazil. would be in Brazilian real, and it would be based on the cost of materials and labour in that city. It's going to be quite different to the cost in Sydney or the cost in London. So it's about local currency, local rates. But then obviously there's always going to be a cheaper option, and that's in part to do with the 20th century model we were talking about, where yes, you can actually make things really cheap if you do it in a way that is just sort of super mass produced, it's super efficient. There are companies doing that in a more responsible way, but there is still, I think, a lot of sort of critique of that model. In our case, there's also super high-end furniture manufacturers who, it's sort of people prepared to pay quite a lot for certain furniture. So our idea is to sit in the middle and say, we're never going to be competing with the cheapest. That's a race to the bottom. We don't want to do that. We're actually existing as a platform to provide opportunities for designers and to send work to fantastic local workshops. So we don't want to shortchange the maker or the designer, but we tell both of them as a platform, it's important that the consumer, the customer, sees that this is good value, right? Otherwise they're not going to buy it and nobody wins. So it has to be a reasonable price. I think people are increasingly happy to, pay when they recognize value. So if they see something's local, sustainable, made of nice materials, robust, all these things, they're probably prepared to pay more than the baseline bottom cost, but they're probably not prepared to pay many thousands of pounds. So that's why we kind of sit where we sit.
I'm with you. I know you've got an example you want to talk about with Greenpeace, who unsurprisingly like the model that you have.
Yeah.
You want to talk us through that example of the work that you did with them?
Yeah, we can do. I'm just going to have to flick through quickly to the right spot. That was the designs. Here we go. So this, for people that don't know a CNC machine, it's just a big sort of cutting machine. Sheet materials, we're using a lot of plywood. They come in certain sizes because they're, that's just how they're produced as a kind of standard. So you end up with a machine a bit like this. Not everybody color coordinates with their machine. That was some makers in New York, in Brooklyn. This is a chap called Enrique in Mexico City. We have over 100 examples like this of fantastic workshops. And this is the Greenpeace office in Islington, central London. And they were one of the first customers we had of a kind of bigger scale. They were obviously interested in the local manufacturing story. They were also really keen on not only knowing about the sustainability of the materials, which you'd obviously expect them to be keen on, but they also wanted to make sure that people making the furniture were fairly treated. They wanted to know about the working conditions. When it came to materials, they wanted the whole sort of chain of custody. So like, which forest does this wood come from? What's the formaldehyde content? What's the embodied CO2? That's quite a tough thing to ask, but actually it's something that we just know because all the workshops we work with, they know where they're ordering their timber, and this data is open. You can actually get to the bottom of all that. And so it was great for us to actually be asked these questions. Greenpeace themselves wanted to visit the workshops in their lunch break. Because they're Greenpeace, they cycle everywhere on a Brompton bike. So we have this group of people from Greenpeace cycling over to a workshop. This is a map of where they are. They're down at the bottom left, and it was 10 minutes cycle, 10 minutes in a car, which is about the same on a bike in London, to the workshop. So I could actually meet them there in the workshop. They could cycle over. We could look, check the material, meet the people who are actually going to make the furniture. They wanted to make a few design tweaks. That was possible. So that's kind of how the model works, and this is sort of a good example of that.
Okay. Questions coming in from online audience. We've got Laura H has asked, great session. What is your favourite furniture that you have, I guess, on your website? She says you've designed, but you don't personally design them. So on your website, what's you got a favourite piece, question. Or actually is that too dangerous to answer that? No,
I'm going to have to cycle back through these. Sorry for the flicking. There's this piece which is by a guy called Josh Worley, who this is one of the first designs that came on the platform that was not by us. So the original desk was by us because we designed the desk before we had the idea for the company. But Josh designed this desk, which is a very nice, very simple, deliberately simple desk, but it has this little feature which is a sort of secret drawer, and it takes advantage of the CNC machining process so that the inside of the drawer can be whatever you want it to be. So, you know, you might have the architect's drawer with a load of pencils, or you might have a special bit to put your watch in, or your hard drive, or whatever it is you want to stash in there. So I liked his approach to sort of very simple, but with a kind of little Easter egg hidden element. And this is a really successful design. So I'd probably choose that one.
Okay, there you go, Josh. We're going to come back to your origin story in just a couple of minutes, but before we get to that, there's so much going on at the DIF over these 3 days. Many live sessions running over these 3 days. Lots to see, and to let you know some of the sessions that are coming up, let's hear about some of those on the way.
Hello everyone, and thanks for joining this brilliant session with our guest Joni Steiner. Continuing strong this afternoon, we are travelling around the globe to discuss how to rethink and innovate plastic packaging at 1:30 p.m. BST. Following that, at 3 p.m. BST, we are discussing the circular economy in Latin America, and at 4:30 p.m. BST, how to link up the bioeconomy. We hope to see you there, and don't forget to use the hashtag ThinkDiff on Twitter to comment and ask any questions. You can catch up on anything you missed and find a full schedule at thinkdiff.co or on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's YouTube channel.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Some of the highlights that are coming up at the DIF over these few days. Anything that you've missed that went out live, don't worry, because it's all there to watch back and will be for some time yet. So we're here with Joni Steiner from OpenDesk. The origin story of OpenDesk I find really interesting because you're not a maker by trade. Could you tell us about where this whole idea came from?
Sure. I'm an architect by training, and just gone back, right, so here's the original OpenDesk. It's a long story, so you might have to cut me short, but it started with somebody I studied with. We still work together, two of the founders or co-founders. We designed a desk for somebody in Clerkenwell in London, a startup, a digital agency. They approached us as architects. They said, can you design our office? We said, yeah, we'd love to. When it came to the furniture, we started showing them some options. You know, there's a lot of furniture out there in the world.
Like through a catalogue?
Yeah, different things online, whatever. And they were like, no, we don't like this, we don't like this. We would like you to design something for us. So our actual response, honest response, was like, you don't want to get architects to design furniture because it's going to be expensive, it's going to be late, it's going to take ages, right? Because they're so picky, and you know, they were like, no, we want you to do it because as a digital agency, they're called Mint Digital. We're interested in design process, in digital tools. They're increasingly interested in going from software into hardware themselves. So they really pushed this, and we thought, okay, well, this is a great brief. I mean, we'd love to do it. Okay, very limited budget, but let's see. So we did our research, and we learned about CNC machining. We were talking about earlier, cutting out shapes. We looked at 3D printing, we looked at other things, but the CNC cutting just seemed like the most viable option. And we also found a workshop that was super close to their office. So we could all go there, we could look at it, the machine, we could talk to the guy running it, and we could learn about this process. So we actually designed the desk with them as a kind of co-designed session. It had to be on time and on budget, so it was, you know, big constraints. But we designed the desk and we had it. Then a little while later, we were looking into actually digital fabrication in general. We actually were looking at the Innovate UK. One of my co-founders, Nick, was actually doing some work with them about digital fabrication, and we wanted to test this idea of local fabrication. We were thinking initially about 3D printing, but then this moment came where with some of the others, we were sitting around in our office, which was a co-working space, and we had our furniture was in that co-working space because we'd furnished it. And we were looking around thinking, well, this desk is actually perhaps the best thing that we can use to just explore this idea. Like, why don't we build a super basic website, because we have the design already. We can host the design files for the desk, and we can maybe put a list of a couple of workshops in the London area, you know, that you could search for with your postcode. A guy called James, who was one of the other co-founders, was our kind of technical lead. He did some work, and then he sort of expanded that so that you could actually start to search a bit wider. We built the website, we put it up, and we thought, okay, that's just a nice little idea. We can sort of, when we're talking to people, we can link them to the website and they can see a sort of demo. And what then happened a couple of days later was that the website crashed, and we actually thought to ourselves, okay, we just built like badly built thing, whatever, it fell over or something. And then James looked at it and he saw the analytics and he sort of said, no, hang on a minute, actually, the reason it crashed is because there's this huge spike and there's all these people who've come to see what we're doing. So we actually looked into where that was coming from. It was all coming from one site, and it was Hacker News. And they'd basically done a post about OpenDesk and said, look, here's an interesting kind of company that's bridging between software and hardware for furniture. And then loads of people got excited about it. So it was a kind of accidental birth. We designed the desk before we had the idea for the company, so we weren't really thinking to have a startup, but then these things kind of happened, and we thought, okay, this is quite interesting. Why don't we see where we could take this? Then, as I mentioned, we started to get people sending designs to us. So we had one design, this desk. We got other designs. We actually asked on our website, we had a little form which we asked people kind of, what would you like the next design to be? We got loads of people that overwhelmingly wanted a standing height desk. So we basically started to work on that. We pulled in some external designs. We hosted a few more things. And it really started to kind of, sort of grow from there.
So it's tipping over at this point from being a nice chat you have around a table and getting a little bit excited about to something that seems like a venture that could become a job, a full-time job.
I think the crucial bit I missed was that the Mint Digital client had an office in New York as well as London. So we designed this desk for them, and they were expecting us, they wanted the same furniture in both offices, and I think they were expecting us to basically make double the amount in London and ship it. And we said to them, well, look, we found a workshop, a guy called Ian, found Ian's workshop. Why don't we just look for the sort of US equivalent of Ian, and we can make it there. We don't have to send it across, we don't have to send wood across the Atlantic. So that actually, we did do that, and we found the workshops in Brooklyn, and that's really what kind of nurtured the idea. And then after that, we sort of said, okay, as architects, this is a sort of hobby project, but this could be a bigger thing. We'd like to see if we can take this beyond just a kind of hobbyist, someone making it, for fun, but actually, could this be a viable alternative for consumers? So could it be a viable choice that people could actually say, I'd like my desk made locally from sustainable materials, et cetera, rather than having to buy it in the traditional way. That's kind of what started it. Yeah.
And I know from there you went through a crowdfunding campaign, and but it wasn't a straightforward buy our product on Kickstarter type campaign. It was something a bit different.
That's right. So with digital fabrication, one of the interesting things is a whole community of people around the world who are just very excited about it. All the different types, the laser cutting, the 3D printing, the CNC. There are maker fairs where people come together and share products, launch products, fab labs all over the world, growing all the time. So people have started talking about OpenDesk in that community. There were also designers, graduates, people we knew who were excited about it because it was a new route for them to get their products to market. It's quite hard to get, as a young designer, to break into some of the established companies. And then there were companies saying, we like this aesthetic because, and we like this idea because increasingly workspaces were, the nature of work was changing. People wanted more sort of domestic friendly workspaces. People wanted their workspace to reflect them as a brand, their ethics, their ideas. They wanted it to just be more welcoming and sort of, ethically better. So all these things came together, and we said, well, actually, why don't we offer all these people a chance to actually own a small part of the company? So our kind of wider community, from makers, designers, kind of digital fabrication community, and also clients. And then rather than giving them a small bit of furniture, we'll actually give them some shares in the company. So we did that. So it was equity crowdfunded through Crowdcube, and we ended up with sort of over 200 very small shareholders.
Wonderful. I think in a few minutes we're going to come on to what's happening next for OpenDesk. But before we get there, tell the viewers at home that the Diff is not simply conversations we have here in the studio. We produce a lot of films along the way too. And these films are available for you to watch on our ThinkDiff website, but also on our ThinkDiff YouTube account. We're going to see a clip of one such film here right now. It's by Ken Webster, who's been a thought leader in the circular economy space for some time. And this will link into questions I'll be putting to Johnny in just a few seconds. So watch Ken Webster in this film called A Flow of Wealth or A Wealth of Flows.
De Rosny is an early systems thinker, and De Rosny wanted to characterize an existing economy and the problems with it. And the main problem he identified was there was no context. This economy was running as a sort of machine sitting on top of stocks and flows of resources and energy. It only touched it where it had to. But what I mean by that is that it wasn't factored in. There was no costing of the resource in a true sense. There was no costing of the waste in a true sense. It was artificially priced. Everything had price, but they didn't really understand the value, is what he was saying. So you needed to contextualize the economy and look at resources and material flows.
Let's pause for a moment and think.
Joel de Rosny came up with the macroscope, which is the idea of dropping detail. We have a microscope to look at the detail, we have a telescope to look at distance. His idea was if we took a macroscope, if we took a big picture view, we could get a sense of the patterns in the economy without worrying about the detail. That's really very, very helpful, because if the problem with the economy was that it hasn't got a context, a macroscope allows you to say, where does an economy sit? Oh, it sits within society, obviously, it sits within environment, and all of these things are intimately interconnected because they're part of a system which isn't mechanical. It's actually dynamic, interdependent. It reflects what we now understand about how the real world works. And the real world works through the notion of complex adaptive systems, which just means a very dynamic system where you can't predict the outcome, but you have lots of patterns that show up. And you can use the patterns to tell you what you might like to do. But it doesn't offer you an answer in the way having an economy as a machine with levers would give you an answer.
There you go, that's Ken Webster. And if you love to geek out on the circular economy, as we do here at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, then heartily recommend that film, A Flow of Wealth or A Wealth of Flows. And as I say, you can see it on our thinkdiff.co website. Thanks for the questions that have been coming in so far. We're here with Johnny for just a few more minutes. We're going to ask him about OpenDesk and what the future holds for OpenDesk. Johnny, you were telling us just before we broke there to watch the film that you went through the crowdfunding campaign, I think it was in 2015. Yeah. Where is OpenDesk now? Is it in the place you wanted it to be, where you projected it would be at that point?
I think the short answer is that we haven't quite got to where we want to be, and I suppose that's also intentional, that we had a kind of stretch goal, which is to be a platform that can grow and not just focus on furniture, for example, and look into sort of other things. I think we've realised and learned on the way that it's quite a big challenge. This idea of distributing making through many small workshops, independent workshops, and reaching customers all over the world and bringing new designs on board, all these things, it is a big thing to bite off. And in some ways we had to focus and say, you know what, it's better if we can make a few products really well in many locations, because the minimum sort of viable thing is one product, one maker. But we had one product, 10 makers, and then we had one product, 110 makers. That's great, because 110 makers can make a product, and 110 makers can be producing things and earning revenue, and that designer is sort of benefiting, everyone's benefiting. I think it's better to have that and then add more products, and then look at sort of adjacent sectors, so away from furniture or slightly different smaller objects, for example, rather than saying we've got 10 products, now we need 100 products, but they're all through one or two makers. So we kind of deliberately done it that way round.
And you raised the tantalising idea there of perhaps not just being about furniture. Yeah. Is that you've been making inroads elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, obviously what's great about these workshops are that people have fantastic skills and capabilities, also tools are evolving. There are new fantastic tools coming out all the time. So it's possible to make more and more complicated, or for example, multi-material products in a similar way. The economy of scale is interesting. We deliberately started with workspaces because we had this desk before we had OpenDesk. But also we found that if you are working with a manufacturer, let's say in San Francisco, and you are in conversation with them and you say, hey, you know, there's a company down the road that wants, you know, 50 desks, they're going to really take notice. And they're going to be very cooperative. You're going to be able to work with them really well. And then if the next order is for one small coffee table, they're like, okay, fine, because there'll be another bigger order coming along. If you start with a very tiny thing, we found that it was a bit harder. And so the B2B idea for workspaces was deliberate, but it was also led by the products we had. We would like to broaden that out. We'd like to sort of give customers a viable alternative to loads of products. At the same time, we need to be a bit careful with our focus and not go too broad. And there are great companies doing great things with, you know, specific verticals with specific products locally as well. So I think, you know, there's options and opportunities, but we need to just be careful where our focus lies, I guess.
But you do want to pivot in terms of materials. I know, linking it back to that circular economy point. Right. I know you've got a few things you want to say in terms of where you see OpenDesk in the future with materials.
Yes, so I'm going to have to flick through some images here. This is our library of designs. Then, so we've got the machines, we've got the makers, we've got Greenpeace, and we've got their local manufacturing. We've got digital files that are shared, hardware shared as software. Which means it's local, but the great thing about all this is it also brings other things into play. So one of the things that we're slightly disappointed with, I suppose, with ourselves, if you like, is yes, there are great designs, yes, there's local makers, but a lot of the material is not super local because there aren't that many cities that are built right next to a supply of, you know, sustainable birch timber. You know, maybe Stockholm, maybe Helsinki. There's a few places where you could say, okay, it's right next door. But actually what cities have is huge waste streams, huge amounts of resource that until recently, and in some cases it still is, basically put into the ground or, you know, sent the other side of the world to be processed or whatever, burnt, you know, terrible things really. Like, I think we should be reducing consumption first and we should be recycling. But we can reuse because, you know, there's great products now being made from waste streams. These are 3 examples on the left. We've got waste fabric. There's a company called Really in Copenhagen, but there are other companies. It's fabric that would otherwise have gone to waste, turned into a very beautiful board, like a rigid board that can be machined in the same way as timber. The waste plastics, a company called Smile Plastics, but again, there are other companies all around Europe and the US taking post-consumer waste plastic and turning it into really beautiful marble-like material.
I've seen it. Made into a
and waste wool. So, you know, what we're talking about, these are some of those boards. Increasingly using material that is, you know, fully circular. I suppose one of the challenges for us is all these materials. The goal is to have local materials, and through a web platform like OpenDesk, you are able to do something interesting like geo-fencing materials. So, for example, if you fired up the OpenDesk website in San Francisco, it could show you the same designs but with different material options to if you were in London or if you were in Moscow or if you're in Sydney. That's still quite a lot of work because we haven't quite got there yet, because not only do we need to find all those materials and make sure that they're suitable, we need to show someone online what they're going to get. And all these materials by their nature are kind of unique because they're made of recycled bits, and that's what makes them beautiful, but it also makes it, you know, then none of them are the same. So we have to find a way to find those materials, evidence them, show them to people, get people to kind of understand and see how beautiful they are, and then actually, you know, buy them through this model. And I know Smile Plastics, for example, they actually show you the sheet that you're going to get. So they've got a way of actually showing every sheet off their sort of production line. That's something we haven't been able to integrate yet, but we'd love to get to that point.
it makes me think of Materium, and I know
yes.
you know of them,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
because they're all about materials that are available locally.
Right.
And perhaps some of these ideas
Yeah.
can come together in order to create those opportunities
Yeah.
you just referred to.
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic. I think that's definitely a major step that we want to take, and collaborating, working with others is probably the way that we're going to get there. So, yeah.
Okay, quick fire questions.
Yeah.
Someone's been firing questions in on the website. Number one, it's Bledar, his name is, would we compromise on quality if open source products become more widely available, or is the inverse true?
Yeah, well, very interesting question. I think that's a couple of things wrapped into one. So open source, it's a software term. Yes, it can be applied to hardware. We talk about open making, which is slightly different, and we let the designer choose. We're agnostic to the design licensing they choose. We would advocate copyleft, which is Creative Commons, but it's not necessarily open source in the software sense. Quality, I think it's a completely different question. It's down to the design and then the manufacturing. So you have the design sort of liability, or like, is this design good enough? Does it work? Is it engineered? You know, if I press on this table, will it collapse? And then there's the materials and the workmanship, and that's like, how well is it made? Is this workshop competent? Do they have the skills? Do they have the machinery? Are they careful enough? You know, so I think we've been very, you know, it's been great to see craft makers making things digitally who really care, and they're actually delivering the products to the customer. So if there's a problem, they're going to face it face to face. So it's actually a really good way of making sure that the quality's there, is to get the person that made it to deliver it and to the customer.
I think you've answered some more of his questions there
Right.
with that response,
Yeah.
which is perfect. I'm going to put you on the spot then for the final question.
Okay.
Finish this sentence. Distributed manufacturing is going to be the future because...
The planet needs it, and we're able to do it.
It's good enough to me. Okay, thanks, Johnny Steiner. Thank you very much for watching this one at home. This is one of many events that are going on at thinkdiff.co. Look at our schedule. You'll see lots of events, and anything that you've missed so far, you can catch up with online. My name's Colin, and I've really enjoyed being with you today. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.
We need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.